If you're the supply chain executive, you have to be driving cost improvement, cash improvement, service, quality, but you also have to own the revenue and the top line for the company.
The transformation of the supply chain that's occurring electronically in various aspects, in various ways, seems to be helping people be more close to the customer in those, like you said, few day or 1 week cycles?
You know, there's a lot of neat gadgets out there, but the best of the best are finding out how to use this technology, both the physical side and the analytical data side, to drive value.
Welcome to the Inside Forbes Councils podcast. Each episode shares transformative insights and advice from members of Forbes Councils, a group of invitation-only communities for successful executives and entrepreneurs. Today, we are delighted to have Forbes Council member Steve Bowen back on the podcast. Steve is the founder and CEO of Pointe, a global leader in supply chain optimization. He's also the author of the critically acclaimed book, Total Value Optimization: Transforming Your Global Supply Chain into a Competitive Weapon. Steve will be speaking with Michael Burnette of the University of Tennessee's Global Supply Chain Institute. Today, supply chain executives should be plugged into every part of a business. But to do this requires a cultural shift. Steve and Michael will explain what this shift is and what CEOs, boards, and leadership need to do to facilitate it. They'll also discuss how new technology is creating a digital supply chain and some words of caution about these new tools. Without further ado, Forbes Council member Steve Bowen, CEO of Pointe, and Michael Burnette of the University of Tennessee's Global Supply Chain Institute.
Hello again, I'm Steve Bowen, the CEO of Pointe. We're a global supply chain and operations consulting firm, and I'm really thrilled to be here again on the Forbes Council podcast. We at Pointe focus on this global supply chain and operations, and we do a lot of work in and around driving EBITDA through cost reductions and growth initiatives, as well as driving cash in businesses. And I'm writing about, as well as talking with you in these podcasts, about various aspects of the supply chain from end to end, inclusive of all operations. And how do you really go about creating real value across your supply chain, especially in the dynamic world today that we have with tariffs, with geopolitical issues, like we have in Hong Kong right now, or be it that we have weather issues like here in the East Coast of the U.S. we just all experienced in the past week or 10 days. I'm here today with Mike Burnette from the University of Tennessee's Global Supply Chain Institute. Mike, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Steve. I'm happy to be here and talk about this important topic of integration in the supply chain.
Well, and in that regard to integration today, Mike, what we hope we can talk about is the aspects of some of the work that you've been doing with the Global Supply Chain Institute and how Pointe's collaborated with you and others at the Institute around the end-to-end supply chain collaboration, integration, as well as, even driving shareholder value with your supply chain. And it always seems that this broad-based topic somehow at some point ends up centering us around the topic of sales and operations planning. And it appears to be one of the major factors from my perspective of helping our clients be successful. I'm really curious, Mike, how you look at that and the Global Supply Chain Institute looks at really this work around the supply chain and why does it keep repeating yet remaining so important?
Well, the macro factors in the last 4 decades have made the supply chain much more complicated, global, increase in regulations, and almost an insatiable quest to drive more and more value for the shareholders. And at a basic level, the fact that we want our supply chain to be integrated with the different components in the supply chain and integrated with the business plan, it seems relatively simple. But the fact of the matter remains, very few companies do it with excellence. So there's a lot of opportunity out there of integrating your supply chain from the rock that you get out of the ground from the supplier all the way to the consumption, and then taking those components and making sure you're lined up with the business plan so you drive the highest value for your shareholders.
Great, Mike. And in thinking about that, in that whole business planning aspect in S&OP, how do you look at, or what are some of the ways that S&OP really helps to drive integration and collaboration enablement?
Steve, we just completed about a year ago a applied research project on S&OP, and we had the opportunity to talk to the best of the best companies, those companies that are doing an excellent job with S&OP. And as you know, we have worked with Pointe on these strategic aspects of how to make sure that that all plays out within the supply chain for collaboration and integration and so forth. And one of the things that we hear from all of the benchmark companies is that integration at its basic level is relatively simple. If we can find a way to make sure that what the supply chain is working on and the commercial community or the demand plan is executing against, and we have common action plans focused on the same thing, we will get higher value for our enterprise. Unfortunately, there's barriers to doing that. And so that's where largely over the last 4 decades, we found that most enterprises are attempting to do S&OP, and they're not doing really a very good job of driving all the value that can be created through integration. This is it's almost a conundrum for the business leaders. We know it's going to deliver better results, but we're frustrated in how to deliver those results. Now, we know that the single biggest barrier to that is cultural. Most of the organizations have a good process for S&OP. They have a good organizational structure. They have good consultants or trainers or internal experts, but they really struggle with getting through the cultural aspects of S&OP.
And when you think of the cultural aspects, Mike, what is there any one or maybe two top aspects of the culture that stick out as need to be tackled?
Yeah, and we've actually completed research on this, and we know from at least the benchmark companies where the top 3 are. So the first one and the biggest barrier to creating integration is reward systems and the functions. Now let me talk a little bit about this since this is the biggest issue. So if you're the supply chain executive, you have to be driving cost improvement, cash improvement, service, quality, but you also have to own the revenue and the top line for the company. Conversely, as the sales leader or the commercial leaders, you have to drive shipments and volume and revenue, but you also have to own the inventory. And until we can create that culture where all of the functions are looking holistically at the business results, you will not have integration. So that's the number one thing in the culture is the reward systems, not only for leaders, but as it explodes down through the organization, because they are trained by those leaders and their work plans and their career objectives are based on delivering those metrics for those functions. Second one is the rituals in the organization. So if you have reward systems and you celebrate things, if you celebrate a month because you did a great job with shipments, but your forecast accuracy was the worst ever, that's sending the wrong message to the organization. It needs to be, the organization and the leadership need to have rituals that focus on celebrating what you want to deliver in your business processes. The third aspect of this is that frequently in our culture, we have multiple assignments within our same function, and we start to believe that our role is the function versus the business. And so we need to get our leaders, like in the supply chain, we need to get them exposed to processes in marketing, processes in finance, processes in sales, end-to-end business processes, so that they can understand what we're really trying to do in the supply chain is drive total value for the entire end-to-end system.
That's really interesting, Mike. And when I think of that end-to-end system, it seems in the work that we do, and our work reasonably well at this point also is through our total value optimization maturity model, we're able to kind of assess the maturity of many organizations. And when we see these characteristics, and I agree, from the rewards, the rituals, to the functional silo and assignments inside of there, it seems to always take me and our teams working with clients right back to the top, to the CEO, because setting that tone in the end-to-end seems to have to come from there, or you end up back in those functional silos you were talking about. So what aspects or viewpoints do you have in terms of how a CEO can go about sending the right kinds of messages to the organization, even before perhaps, or as they're also adjusting some of these reward aspects?
I think you're hitting on a critical point here, Steve. The board and the senior directors of the company, their behavior has as big a factor to the culture of the organization as any other element. They're role modeling of what they want. So let me give you a simple example. And we were visiting a company and they couldn't understand why they couldn't get the culture right for SNOP. And, they were talking about, well, we have this, we're teaching people the importance of single number and everybody being on the same team and everybody working on the same plan. And then I asked them, what types of business plans do they expect from the general manager? And they said, we need two. We need one that the whole organization is working on and one that we can use to manage externally. And I asked them to stop and think about that for a second. You're asking for the opposite of, you're asking the general manager for the opposite of what we're trying to achieve for the rest of the organization. And that's just one simple example of how the board, how they role model, how they, what they ask for, what they inspect, what they celebrate, has to be consistent with integration.
Well, I think this ties to another really involved topic here. We'll try to keep simple for today, Mike, but I'd sure appreciate, and I'm sure the listeners would appreciate, some of your perspective on what I'm going to call sometimes a lack of the longer view of this end-to-end supply chain. And it seems that as you go down into the generational aspects of our leadership, the people closer to, say, coming out of the University of Tennessee's supply chain school, etc., and other places, have a better, almost enhanced understanding of this end-to-end supply chain than sometimes some of the more senior people. And I'm not trying to indict senior people here. I'm trying to raise the issue around what you're talking about of how the senior management, starting with the CEO, communicate.
Exactly. And I think this building, let's use a couple examples, one a cultural example, but then we'll talk about some other types of examples. But, building the culture for the long term. We want our culture based on integrity, data, decision making, a focus on our consumers and customers, and our actions have to be consistent with that. And when the leadership's actions aren't consistent with that, you're not building that long-term culture. And then subsequently, these decisions that can be made in SNOP, if every month you make a decision for the short term, you're not building a long-term business plan that's viable. And an example for that is, we're going to add 3 or 4 promotions because we think we can make a, XYZ out of it, and then we don't have the capacity to supply them. That is a recipe for, basically driving that trust relationship with your customers and consumers out if you can't supply the products that you've committed to in the business plan. And so it's, those short-term decisions in the monthly meeting, or another one is the failure of making a decision. The organization brings the decision sheets to the, to the leadership SNOP, and, we consistently ask for more data or more time or more this. And in today's world, you don't really have more time. It's, it's like a traditional SNOP is a 4-week cycle. We haven't got to the digital and analytical piece, but most of the benchmark companies are making those more real time. They're going down to 1-week cycles and 2-week cycles. So this seeking perfection and seeking, avoiding making decisions is another thing that drives value away in the long term.
Well, I think you just hit 2 very important topics tied to the communication from the senior management. And underneath of all of that, for people to be able to execute their job, You brought up this whole data analytics and the digital supply chain and what's happening with that. That term itself can be a bit controversial, but the transformation of the supply chain that's occurring electronically in various aspects, in various ways, seems to be both helping people be more close to the customer in those, like you said, few day or 1 week cycles. It also seems to be creating some confusion out there, or shall I say, accelerating some of the bad habits of the past. Exactly. What's your perspective on the data?
I like to think about the digital revolution as one of the most positive things that's impacted the supply chain in a number of years. I mean, if you think about the possibilities of being able on the physical side to use devices like robotics and servo motors and smart devices and all that in the plants and the warehouses and our transportation systems, it creates just amazing scale opportunity. It makes cost reduction opportunities, makes it easier for our employees to do the right thing and to do quality work. And then on the data side and the cognitive and the big data side, we're able to analyze things like we've never been able to analyze before. And we're able to predict the future versus just assess the past. So these tools are amazing. Now, as you mentioned, there's a price to pay for this. The resources and skills required to operate in this environment are very different.
Right.
We just, in this study that we just did on the digital supply chain, we listed 50 digital tools. Only about 10 of them really create an ROI at this point. So who's doing that assessment for you? How are you applying those digital tools to your business, to to the core issues in your business? There's a lot of neat gadgets out there, but the best of the best are finding out how to use this technology, both the physical side and the analytical data side, to drive value. It's one thing to play with a drone, but it's another thing if you can save money by using drone for your physical inspections on an oil rig. That's a value-added activity that's saving you money and improving the quality of that work process. So this is true not only in the physical side, but it's also true in the data side. We can collect all kinds of data, but if we can't make a decision with the data, it's not helpful.
You said so eloquently with that one statistic of 10 in 50 investments currently going on with digital or data-related activities has a real identifiable ROI on it. This seems to me to be one of the biggest quandaries that exist, and people fail to do an assessment, at least from our perspective in our total value optimization. One of the 5 characteristics we measure principally is data analytics and their maturity. And it's like people try to go from what's a very basic level of maturity, a 1 or a 2 on a scale of 0 to 5, where you got an ERP system and you still got a bunch of spreadsheets going on, and they try to leapfrog, and then they end up wondering why they don't find real results when they have it in the middle, fix the process and help the organization culturally understand what end-to-end supply chain means and what S&OP means overall. And it's almost like you can take a step forward to go 2 steps back instead of take a step back to go 2 steps forward. That's at least the experience we're seeing. It's the sexy thing to do right now, but is it the best thing to drive the results? And I think you're saying the same thing to assess that, right?
No, I'm saying the exact same thing. For most companies in the world, they have an ERP system. It's very expensive. It has a lot of capability. And if they just got the full capability out of their ERP system, they could drive significantly more value. Now, I would say the 3 things that we've learned. 1, make sure these decisions have a rate of return, return on the investment. That's the first thing. And to do that, you need to have the skills and resources either in your company or partners that you trust to be able to make that assessment for you. The second thing is they need to be flexible and they need to be modular. If you make some decisions and it causes you to go on a completely different platform, you should hesitate and think about that, because you're really making a platform decision, investment for the long term. And the truth is, most of these digital tools and data systems are becoming less platform based. So, what I mean by this is, if you can look for things that you can add to your current system or use the internet as your host, so that they're flexible and modular, and you can build on that versus jumping all the way into the ocean. Those three things, the rate of return, the flexibility, and the modularity, are to me the prime issues as you get into this confusing sea of digitization tools and techniques, and how are they going to help you.
Mike, I couldn't agree with you more, and we talk about it a lot with our clients. Of you've got some kind of ERP system, or maybe you have multiple ones. That's okay. And how do you take and use the available tools that the independent software providers provide today? Oftentimes, even with, I think what you're saying, reasonable investment apps that are computing things and modularizing aspects of the total ERP system to give people visibility and usable information to make these kind of decisions in the overall S&OP process across that supply chain. And that is something that many, many opinions exist on. And again, comes back to the leadership of bringing together a cohesive viewpoint of what is sales and operations planning for our company, for our end-to-end supply chain, to help both our customers and our suppliers, as well as even their suppliers, to have that visibility end-to-end. And if we provide people visibility, Mike, I think you find that people make really good decisions. If you don't provide them the visibility, they're going to make the best decision they can with what they have.
Yeah, I could only tell a story about a benchmark company that we visited, and they really were working on all cylinders in S&OP, and it made all their work simpler. It created time for them because they were spending less time in the organizational tension area and more time on just, okay, here's the demand, here's the supply, and how can we get everybody going? Interestingly, they decided to start thinking about shifting their focus in S&OP, not only from integration, but business intelligence. How can we use this process to learn about our customers, our competition, our consumers, our own supply system, and so forth, and then leverage that to drive higher levels of value? And I think it's a huge enabler. Once you can clean up and get yourself focused on the integration, utilizing the systems, data systems, and analysis that we have today that we haven't had in the past, and then learning more about your business so that you can be a better competitor.
Absolutely, Mike. And I think that, brings together one kind of just final thought I would share, which is the ability to be able to help your suppliers and your suppliers, along with your customers, create value.
Exactly.
This seems to be the biggest conundrum that still exists today, which is people get into this mode when they think about just pure purchasing or procurement versus strategic supply, or this whole S&OP process of price. And then we forget about all the value creation tools that exist that can help balance the profit margins across that supply chain for everybody. And when you get that, you get a winning supply chain. And I think in summation, it's along these lines that I've seen the Global Supply Chain Institute try to advocate that it's creating this kind of ecosystem, if you will, with your customers and your suppliers that creates real value.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more with your statement. I think this is where the big ideas lie. I mean, you can do another sourcing study and try to squeeze another half a cent out of somebody, but there's 10-cent ideas out there if you're working together, and you can really drive a full end-to-end system.
Well, with that, Mike, I can't thank you enough for joining me here today on the podcast and to discuss this really important topic and never-ending topic of sales and operations planning to help drive that demand signal all the way back through the supply chain. We appreciate all the work you do, and if anybody's interested out there in some of the work the Global Supply Chain Institute is doing at the University of Tennessee, you can go to the University of Tennessee website and to the Global Supply Chain Institute website and see many different papers that have been created by the Institute over the years in and around all of these topics of synchronization, integration, collaboration up and down the supply chain. So Mike, thank you so much for joining us here today. And I would just say on our behalf here together is that it's been a pleasure working with you before, and I've really enjoyed today, and I know we'll be doing this again soon in the near future. And people who want to learn more, don't hesitate to reach out, even including going to, places like Forbes.com and searching out different articles. We just put out this article on sales and operations planning in a digital end-to-end demand supply chain on our website, and on Forbes.com. There's many different pieces of information. So I know, Mike, you guys are always encouraging people to educate themselves, and I hope with that we'll have an opportunity to educate others again in the near future.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. And as you said, we're very aligned with Maine Pointe on this quest to get end-to-end total value. And like you said, on the Haslam and Global Supply Chain Institute websites, all this information is free. You can download it, and hopefully you can improve your business. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
Many companies have room to improve their supply chain management and sales and operations planning. The work that it takes to move to a holistic company culture and break teams out of functional silos will impact the bottom line. And while some new technologies are really exciting and hold a lot of promise to improve supply chain management, make sure that they actually drive a return on investment. That's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank Steve Bowen for bringing us this interview. And thank you for listening, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. If you're not a member of a Forbes Council and are interested in joining, go to ForbesCouncils.com to see if you qualify. Thank you again, and we'll see you on the next episode.